The air at Forward Operating Base Sentinel was not so much a gas as it was a particulate suspension. It was a physical substance you wore, a fine, gritty talc of pulverized rock and desiccated history that worked its way into the threads of your uniform, the action of your rifle, and the quietest corners of your soul. It tasted of diesel exhaust and ancient dust, a flavor that clung to the back of the throat and could never be fully washed away. The sun was a malevolent star, a thermonuclear tyrant that beat down upon the corrugated metal roofs and HESCO barriers, bleaching the world into shades of beige and glaring white. Sound was a constant, layered symphony of mechanical survival. The distant, percussive whump of helicopter rotors, the asthmatic wheeze of overworked air conditioning units, and the foundational, bone-deep hum of the massive generators that gave the outpost its electric lifeblood. This was a place at the very edge of the map, a temporary city built of wire, sand, and relentless will, existing for the sole purpose of projecting power into a landscape that was fundamentally hostile to its presence. In the center of this orchestrated chaos, inside the cavernous, echoing shell of the primary mess hall, the air was thicker still, heavy with the smells of industrial-strength coffee, scorched eggs, and the faint, cloying sweetness of stale beer that seemed to have permeated the very plywood of the floor from 1,000 spilled glasses. It was a place of brief, guarded respite, where the rigid hierarchies of the field softened into a more fluid social dynamic, though they never truly disappeared. Marines gathered in familiar clumps, their voices a low rumble of shared grievances and crude jokes, the easy camaraderie of men who depended on each other for their very existence. The light was institutional, a flat, unforgiving fluorescent glare that buzzed with its own monotonous energy, stripping all color and shadow from the faces beneath it. At a small table in the corner, away from the boisterous main currents of the room, a woman sat alone. She was an island of stillness in a sea of restless motion. There was nothing about her that demanded a second glance, and for that precise reason, she was a masterpiece of anonymity. Her uniform was a sterile, unadorned flight suit, devoid of rank, name tape, or unit patches. It was clean, practical, and utterly nondescript. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun that allowed no stray strands to escape. Her face, clear of makeup, was composed in an expression of neutral observation. She was not young, but her age was indeterminate, etched not with the fine lines of laughter or worry, but with a kind of weathered permanence, as if she had been exposed to the elements for a very long time. She ate her meal with a slow, deliberate economy of motion, her gaze distant, fixed on some point beyond the walls of the mess hall, her mind clearly occupied with calculations and variables far removed from the mundane reality of her surroundings. She was a ghost at the feast, a blank space in the vibrant tapestry of the faube, and she seemed to prefer it that way. Leaning against the table beside her, its custom-fitted stock resting on the gritty floor, was her rifle. It was this object, more than the woman herself, that was the anomaly. It was not a standard-issue M4 carbine or an M27 infantry automatic rifle. It was a heavily modified piece of ordnance, a precision instrument that radiated a quiet lethality. The chassis was a skeletal, lightweight alloy, the optic suite a complex arrangement of lenses and sensors that looked more suited to an observatory than a battlefield, and the barrel was fluted, wrapped in carbon fiber, and tipped with a suppressor of unfamiliar design. It was a tool built for a very specific and very deadly purpose. It was a surgeon's scalpel in a room full of butcher's knives, and it did not belong. This incongruity did not go unnoticed. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Rourke, known to his men as Gunny, saw it from across the room, and it offended him on a deeply professional level. Rourke was a man carved from the very granite of Marine Corps tradition. His face was a roadmap of hard-won experience, his jaw perpetually set in a look of grim disapproval, and his barrel chest swelled with the unshakable certainty of his own authority. He moved through the mess hall not as a guest, but as a proprietor, his presence a physical force that radiated waves of dominance. He was the undisputed king of this small, dusty castle, the keeper of the flame, the enforcer of standards. His world was one of black and white, of regulations followed and orders obeyed. Gray areas were for the weak and the indecisive, and the sight of this anonymous woman, with her unauthorized, exotic weapon, was a splash of unacceptable gray, right in the middle of his perfectly ordered universe. He approached her table with the deliberate rolling gait of a predator. His two corporals, acolytes in his cult of aggressive masculinity, trailed in his wake like pilot fish. Rourke stopped directly in front of her, casting a long shadow that fell across her meal. He planted his fists on his hips, a classic posture of manufactured authority, and let the silence stretch, expecting her to look up, to show deference, to acknowledge the arrival of a superior power. She did not. She continued to eat, her focus unbroken, her placid expression unchanged. It was as if he were not there, a mere disturbance in the air, a flicker in the fluorescent lights. This, more than the rifle, was the true insult. It was a denial of his very existence, a rejection of the authority he had spent 2 decades cultivating. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "That's a nice piece of gear you got there," he began, his voice a low, condescending drawl laced with artificial bonhomie. It was the voice of a man baiting a trap. The corporals behind him smirked, sensing the beginning of a familiar ritual, the public dressing down of someone who had dared to step out of line. The ambient noise of the mess hall seemed to dip slightly as nearby tables turned their attention to the unfolding drama. The woman finished chewing a piece of reconstituted chicken, swallowed, and then, for the first time, lifted her eyes to meet his. Her gaze was not fearful or defiant, or even annoyed. It was cool, analytical, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the look of a scientist examining a specimen under a microscope. "It serves its purpose," she said, her voice quiet but clear, carrying an unexpected resonance. Rourke's smirk widened. The answer was too calm, too simple. It confirmed his assumption. She was a civilian contractor, probably some tech geek from a Beltway bandit firm, playing soldier with her expensive toys. They were all the same, these people. They came out to the field with no discipline, no respect for the uniform, and a misplaced sense of superiority. They thought their advanced degrees and 6-figure salaries made them better than the men who actually fought and bled. It was his sworn duty to correct this misconception whenever he encountered it. "Its purpose," he echoed, savoring the words. "Right. I'm sure it does. But you see, out here, we have a thing called standards, uniformity. We all carry the same gear because it builds cohesion. It means I know that every Marine under my command is equipped for the mission. We're not a collection of individuals. We're a unit." He leaned forward, placing his scarred knuckles on her table, invading her personal space. The smell of chewing tobacco and righteous indignation washed over her. "And that thing is not a standard-issue Marine Corps rifle, which means you are not a Marine. So my question is, who the hell are you, and how did you get that rifle onto my fob?" The accusation hung in the air, thick and heavy. He delivered the final words with a theatrical flourish, his voice rising in volume, turning the inquiry into a public indictment. He was not asking a question. He was passing a sentence. He expected a flustered explanation, a stammered apology, perhaps a flash of indignation that he could then crush with the full weight of his rank and experience. He was ready for the argument, for the confrontation. He lived for it. The woman simply blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. She placed her fork down, aligning it perfectly parallel to her knife on the side of her tray. The small, precise gesture was somehow more infuriating than any shouted retort could have been. It was a display of profound, almost inhuman control. She was a lioness allowing a jackal to dance and bark at the very edge of its kill radius, utterly unconcerned by the display. "This rifle was issued to me," she stated, her tone as flat and unyielding as a slab of armor plate. It was a simple declaration of fact, offered with no supporting evidence or emotional plea. Rourke laughed, a short, sharp bark that was pure derision. "Issued to you? By who? The Sears and Roebuck catalog? Lady, I've been in this man's Marine Corps for 22 years. I know every piece of equipment in the inventory, from a P-38 can opener to a Javelin missile. And I have never, ever seen a weapon like that assigned to anyone, let alone some data analyst who looks like she got lost on her way to the green zone." The corporals snickered. The circle of onlookers widened. Rourke felt a surge of satisfaction. He was in his element, the center of attention, the defender of the faith. He was teaching a lesson, not just to this woman, but to everyone watching. This is what happens when you disrespect the institution. This is what happens when you challenge the established order. He reached out, his hand moving to grab the rifle. It was a flagrant assertion of dominance, a physical claim of ownership over the situation. "I'm going to have to confiscate this," he said, his voice hardening into the official tone of command. "We'll get it sorted out down at the armory. You can explain to the master sergeant there how you came to be in possession of an unauthorized weapon on a forward operating base." Before his fingers could touch the cold metal of the chassis, her hand shot out. It was not a fast or aggressive movement. It was a simple, economical motion, but it was executed with a speed and precision that was startling. Her fingers did not grab his wrist. They simply pressed against it, at a precise point where nerve and bone met. There was no force, no violence, just a firm, undeniable pressure. Rourke's hand stopped dead. It wasn't that she was overpowering him. It was that his own body was refusing to complete the command his brain had sent. A jolt, like a low-voltage electrical current, shot up his arm. "I would advise against that, Gunnery Sergeant," she said. Her voice had not changed in volume, but its quality had shifted. The quiet resonance was now tinged with something cold and hard, the sound of diamond cutting steel. It was the sound of absolute, bottomless authority. For the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced Rourke's armor of certainty. It was a foreign, unpleasant sensation. Who was this woman? Her eyes, which he was now looking into from only a few feet away, were unnerving. They held a depth of knowledge and experience that he could not fathom. They were the eyes of someone who had seen things he could not imagine, who had made decisions that would have broken lesser men. He felt a primal instinct, the animal sense of a predator that has just realized it has mistaken a far more dangerous creature for prey. But his pride, his public face, was now committed. He could not back down. Not in front of his men. Not in front of the entire mess hall. To retreat now would be a catastrophic loss of face, an abdication of the very authority he was trying to project. He had to double down. He snatched his hand back, shaking it as if to rid it of her touch. "You would advise against it?" he snarled, forcing bravado back into his voice. "You're in no position to advise anyone of anything, lady. You are in a world of trouble. Now, give me the weapon. That's a direct order." The woman slowly removed her hand from his wrist and placed it back in her lap. She leaned back in her chair, a subtle shift in posture that somehow increased the distance between them. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips, the sound of a patient teacher dealing with a particularly slow and stubborn student. "Gunnery Sergeant," she said, and for the first time, she used his title not as a point of contention, but as a clinical designation, like a doctor identifying a patient's condition. "Your tactical awareness is compromised. You have fixated on a non-threat while your situational perception has degraded to a critical level. You are loud. You are drawing attention. You are creating a vulnerability. Your actions are inefficient and counterproductive to mission readiness. You have failed to properly assess your environment and the assets within it. This is a significant professional deficiency." Each sentence was a perfectly placed shot, delivered with the cold precision of the rifle that sat between them. It was not an insult. It was a diagnosis. It was a clinical, dispassionate deconstruction of his failure as a leader, and it was delivered in the language of a formal after-action review. It cut him deeper than any profanity could have. He was momentarily stunned into silence, his mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of her words. She was critiquing him, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Rourke. Before he could formulate a response, before he could unleash the torrent of rage and indignation building in his chest, the world ended. It began not with a bang, but with a sudden, terrifying silence. The constant, foundational hum of the generators cut out. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the mess hall into a disorienting, murky twilight, lit only by the harsh, dusty sunlight filtering through the few high windows. The cheerful pop music that had been playing over the speakers vanished, replaced by an unnerving quiet. For a single, suspended heartbeat, the entire FOB held its breath. Then came the sound. It was a high-pitched, electronic shriek that seemed to come from everywhere at once, a piercing digital scream that vibrated in the teeth and sinuses. It was the sound of every radio, every communication system, every piece of networked equipment on the base simultaneously broadcasting pure, weaponized static. It was the auditory signature of a massive electronic warfare attack. Chaos erupted. Marines who had been laughing moments before were now on their feet, chairs clattering against the floor. Shouts of confusion and alarm echoed in the sudden darkness. "What the hell was that?" "Comms are down." "Incoming?" The carefully constructed bubble of safety and routine had been violently burst. The instincts honed by years of training took over, but without information, without orders, those instincts were directionless. Panic began to curdle at the edges of the room. Rourke reacted as he had been trained. He roared, his voice a massive physical force that momentarily cut through the rising panic. "Everyone down! Find cover! Weapons ready! Status reports, now!" But his orders were futile. Status reports to whom? The comms were dead. Down where? The mess hall was a giant, open box. He was shouting into a void, his authority rendered meaningless by a crisis he did not understand. He was a warrior of gunpowder and steel, a master of the physical battlefield, but this was something else. This was witchcraft. This was a silent, invisible enemy that had reached past the walls and wires and strangled the base's central nervous system. His confidence, so absolute just moments ago, evaporated into a cold, sickening dread. He was blind, deaf, and utterly powerless. In the midst of the chaos, the woman at the corner table did not move. She had not flinched. She had not shouted. She had not sought cover. She simply sat, her head cocked slightly to one side, listening, not with her ears, but with some other, deeper sense. She was tasting the electronic disruption, analyzing its texture, its frequency, its intent. The clinical, dispassionate expression on her face had not changed, but her eyes were now alight with a fierce, focused intelligence. The observer had become the operator. With a fluid grace that seemed impossible in the bulky flight suit, she rose to her feet. The chaotic energy of the room seemed to part around her, an invisible wave breaking against the rock of her unnatural calm. She picked up the rifle. It was not a weapon now, but an extension of her will, a key designed to unlock the problem. She slung it over her shoulder and strode purposefully towards the command tent, her boots making a steady, rhythmic sound on the floor that was an anchor of sanity in the swirling madness. Rourke watched her go, his mouth agape. His world had been turned upside down in the span of 30 seconds. The woman he had been publicly humiliating, the civilian he had dismissed as a poser, was now moving with a purpose and a certainty that he, the gunnery sergeant, the king of the FOB, could not begin to muster. He was frozen, a statue of obsolete authority, while she was a vector of pure, focused action. She moved through the panicked crowds like a surgeon navigating a crowded emergency room. There was no hesitation. She did not push or shove. People simply seemed to sense her passage and move aside. Her destination was the Tactical Operations Center, or what passed for one on this remote outpost. It was a large, climate-controlled tent filled with screens, radios, and the nerve endings of the FOB's command structure. As she entered, she found exactly what she had expected: organized pandemonium. The base commander, a major whose experience was primarily in logistics and administration, was shouting into a dead satellite phone, his face slick with sweat. Communications specialists were frantically rebooting systems that would not respond, their screens filled with cascading lines of error code. The digital scream of the EW attack filled the tent, making coherent thought all but impossible. They were drowning in corrupted data, their technological superiority turned against them, transformed into a cage. The woman did not ask for permission. She did not announce her presence. She walked directly to the primary communications rack, a humming tower of servers and routers that was now spitting gibberish. From a pocket on her flight suit, she produced a small, shielded toolkit. With practiced, economical movements, she unlatched a service panel, ignoring the frantic protests of a nearby sergeant. Her fingers danced across the circuitry within, pulling a cable here, flipping a shielded switch there, her movements a blur of expertise. She was not repairing the system. She was bypassing it, dissecting it, performing emergency surgery on its very spine. She pulled a coiled fiber optic cable from her own kit and jacked it directly into a port that was clearly labeled for diagnostic use only. The other end she plugged into a hardened data port on the stock of her rifle. She then knelt, resting the weapon's forend on a server rack, and brought the complex optical sight to her eye. The rifle was no longer just a rifle. It had become a terminal, a broadcast dish, a decryption engine. "Give me a sit rep," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. It was not a request. It was a command, spoken with an authority that was so absolute, so innate, that it momentarily silenced the entire tent. The logistics major turned, his face a mask of confusion and anger. "Who in the hell are you?" he demanded. "This is a restricted area. Sergeant, get her out of here." The woman did not even look at him. Her eye was pressed to the optic, her fingers moving on a small, integrated keypad near the trigger guard. Data was scrolling across a tiny display inside the scope, visible only to her. "That is a counterproductive order, Major. The enemy is using a polymorphic jamming signal, cycling through frequencies on a quantum-encrypted algorithm. Your standard countermeasures are not just ineffective, they are broadcasting your system weaknesses. You are feeding the beast. Shut down all active response transmitters. Now." Her words were a foreign language of expertise. Quantum-encrypted algorithm, polymorphic jamming, the terms hung in the air, alien and terrifying. The communications sergeant stared at her, his jaw slack with dawning comprehension. He was a trained professional, but he was a mechanic who knew how to change the oil. This woman was the engineer who had designed the engine. "Do it," she commanded, her voice dropping a half octave. The sergeant, acting on an instinct deeper than the chain of command, scrambled to obey, his fingers flying across his keyboard, killing the automated electronic countermeasure systems. The screaming static in the room dropped in pitch, changing its texture. "They've noticed," the woman murmured, almost to herself. "They are adapting. Smart." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was not a smile of humor, but of professional respect for a worthy adversary. "They are spoofing our drone control frequencies, attempting a hostile takeover of our aerial surveillance assets. I need control of Sentinel Tower 3. Give me priority access to its microwave dish." I can't do that," the major stammered. "That requires O6 level authorization." The woman finally turned her head, fixing the major with her cold, analytical gaze. "Major, in approximately 90 seconds, the drone swarm that is currently being redirected will achieve its kinetic attack solution on this command tent. You have two options. You can give me control of that dish, or you can die arguing about protocol. Your choice." The blunt, brutal logic of her statement shattered his resistance. He nodded numbly to the tower control specialist, who immediately began rerouting the necessary permissions. On the woman's optical display, new data streams appeared. She was now seeing the raw feed from the powerful microwave transmitter. Her fingers flew on the keypad, not typing code, but composing it in real time. She was writing a new language, a digital counter-virus designed to fight the enemy's signal. "I'm creating a handshake protocol based on a prime number sequence," she explained, her voice a calm, steady lecture in the heart of the storm. "It will isolate the enemy's spoofing signal and create a temporary, secure channel. It will not last long, but it will be long enough." She toggled a switch on the rifle. "Transmitting now." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, on the main tactical display, one of the red icons representing a hostile-controlled drone flickered. It turned from red to blue. Then another, and another. Within 10 seconds, the entire swarm had reverted to friendly control. She had wrestled them back from the brink, not with a bomb or a bullet, but with pure mathematics. "The swarm is secure," she announced. "Now let's go on the offensive. Route their control signal back on itself. Let's find out who's knocking on our door." She began typing again, her commands now sharp and aggressive. She was turning their own weapon against them. A new icon appeared on the map, miles outside the FOB's perimeter. It was the source of the broadcast. "There you are," she whispered. Just as she spoke, the main doors to the TOC were thrown open. A figure stood silhouetted against the harsh outdoor light. It was Colonel Jensen, the commander of the entire sector, who had just landed via helicopter, drawn by the sudden communications blackout. He was a grizzled veteran of a dozen conflicts, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from naval tradition itself. Behind him, looking pale and shaken, was Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, who had apparently followed the woman, drawn by a morbid need to see how this impossible situation would resolve. Colonel Jensen's eyes scanned the chaotic scene, his expression grim. His gaze fell upon the kneeling woman with the strange rifle, who seemed to be the calm center of the storm. He took in the scene: the bypassed comms rack, the data cable running from her weapon, the tactical map that was now miraculously populated with friendly icons and a new, hostile target. His eyes, which had seen everything, widened slightly. A look of profound, almost religious awe spread across his features. He knew the rifle. He knew the posture. He knew the legend. He strode forward, his boots clanging on the metal floor. He stopped a few feet from her. He did not question her. He did not demand an explanation. He simply drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and executed the sharpest, most respectful salute of his long and decorated career. "General Reed," he said, his voice resonating with a reverence that stunned every person in the tent into absolute silence. "I apologize for the delay. My helicopter was engaged." The woman did not look up from her scope. "Your timing is adequate, Colonel. The immediate threat is neutralized. I have a location on the enemy EW unit. I suggest you dispatch a quick reaction force to that position before they can pack up and disappear. They are located at grid coordinate 497321. Tell your men to be cautious. They're clever, and they will likely have a security element." "Yes, ma'am," Jensen replied, already turning to relay the order. The name descended on the room like a physical weight. General Reed. Not just a general, but General Evelyn Reed. The Ghost, the architect of the military's entire cyber warfare and special technology division. A living myth, a figure whose exploits were whispered about in classified briefings and intelligence annexes. She was a name associated with impossible victories in unseen wars, a commander who fought not with battalions, but with algorithms and electrons. She was said to travel without an entourage, to appear on battlefields unannounced, to test systems and personnel under real-world conditions. She was a legend who had just walked out of the pages of a top-secret file and into their lives, and Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Rourke had just spent 10 minutes threatening to confiscate her rifle. The blood drained from Rourke's face. His entire body went cold. The structure of his universe, his 22 years of Marine Corps certainty, did not just crack, it sublimated, turning from solid rock into a cloud of vapor. He saw the scene again in his mind's eye, his own arrogant posturing, his condescending words, his attempt to physically grab her weapon. He had not been dressing down a civilian contractor. He had been publicly berating and very nearly assaulting a 4-star general. A 4-star general who had then single-handedly saved the entire base from a catastrophic attack that he hadn't even understood was happening. The humiliation was so profound, so total, that it was almost a spiritual experience. He felt his knees weaken, and he had to brace himself against the doorframe to keep from collapsing. After the QRF had been dispatched, and the base's systems were slowly being brought back online under the general's calm supervision, she finally rose. She unplugged the rifle, coiled her cable with the same precise movements she used for everything, and slung the weapon over her shoulder. The crisis was over. It was time to return to the previous matter. She walked over to Colonel Jensen, who was now coordinating the FOB's recovery. "Colonel," she said, her voice back to its quiet, neutral tone. "I'll be conducting the debrief on this incident personally. Please have the logistics major and your entire comms team report to the briefing tent at 1800. "Yes, General," Jensen replied without hesitation. Then, she turned her gaze upon Gunnery Sergeant Rourke. He flinched as if she had struck him. He could not meet her eyes. He stared at a spot on the floor, awaiting the thunderclap of doom he so richly deserved. The end of his career, a court-martial, public disgrace. It was all he could expect. General Reed walked toward him until she was standing directly in front of him. The entire TOC was silent, watching this final, terrible act of the play. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Gunnery Sergeant Rourke," she began, her voice calm and clinical. "Earlier today you failed. This was not a personal failure, nor was it a simple breach of decorum. It was a tactical failure of the highest order. Your primary function as a senior non-commissioned officer is to maintain discipline and readiness. But you confused rigid adherence to superficial regulations with the actual execution of your duty. You saw a deviation from the norm, and your cognitive process immediately classified it as a threat to be neutralized rather than a potential asset to be assessed." She took a step closer. "Your prejudice, your assumption based on my gender and my lack of insignia, created a critical blind spot. You were so focused on the perceived slight to your authority that you failed to recognize the single greatest tactical resource on this entire base. Had the attack occurred 5 minutes earlier, while you were still actively distracting me, the outcome could have been catastrophic. Your ego almost cost the lives of every person under your command. Arrogance, Gunnery Sergeant, is a more dangerous enemy than any drone or jamming signal. It is a cancer that corrodes judgment." Rourke could say nothing. He simply stood there, absorbing the verbal blows, each one landing with the force of a physical impact. She was not angry. She was not yelling. She was dissecting him, laying bare the precise mechanics of his failure for all to see. It was far worse than any punishment he could have imagined. "I have reviewed your service record," she continued, and he was stunned to realize she must have done so in the moments she was fighting a cyber war. "It is exemplary. 22 years of honorable service, multiple combat deployments. You are, by all conventional metrics, a superb Marine. But you have a flaw in your programming, a critical vulnerability in your operational code. It needs to be patched." She paused. Rourke braced himself. This was it. "Therefore," she said, "a court-martial would be an inefficient use of a valuable asset. Punishment is a blunt instrument. Education is a force multiplier. As of 0600 tomorrow, you are reassigned. You will report to my staff. You will be my new executive assistant. You will carry my gear. You will manage my schedule. You will stand by my side in every briefing, every operational test, and every battlefield circulation for the next year. You will see how decisions are made at the strategic level. You will learn the difference between the appearance of order and the reality of command. Your education begins tomorrow. Do you understand me, Gunnery Sergeant?" Rourke finally managed to lift his head. He looked into her eyes and saw no malice, no triumph. He saw only purpose. She was not punishing him. She was fixing him. She was recalibrating him. It was the most terrifying and most profound thing that had ever happened to him. "Yes, ma'am," he choked out, the word ma'am feeling utterly inadequate. He forced himself to stand straight, to look her in the eye, and to give the salute that his body and soul now knew she had earned 1,000 times over. Crystal clear, General. The story of that day on FOB's Sentinel became the stuff of legend. It was told and retold in barracks, in officers' clubs, and in the hushed halls of the Pentagon. It became a modern military fable, a teaching tool used at war colleges and NCO academies. The details shifted with each telling. Sometimes the weapon was a railgun, sometimes the attack was a salvo of hypersonic missiles, but the core truth of it, the essential lesson, remained immutable. It was the story of Rourke's epiphany, or more commonly, the day the ghost walked among us. Years passed. Marcus Rourke did not just serve his year with General Reed, he served 3. He traveled the world with her, a silent, observant shadow. He saw her outthink enemy commanders, outmaneuver politicians, and inspire awe in scientists and soldiers alike. He saw the sheer, crushing weight of the responsibility she carried with such quiet grace. He learned that true authority is not projected. It is earned. It is not loud. It is quiet. It is not in the insignia on a collar, but in the competence of one's actions. He was remade, reforged in the fire of her intellect and will. He eventually returned to the fleet, no longer a gunnery sergeant, but a master gunnery sergeant. He was a different man. The boisterous arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence rooted not in rank, but in wisdom. He became one of the most respected and effective senior enlisted leaders in the Marine Corps, known for his uncanny ability to identify and cultivate talent, no matter how unconventional its packaging. He was often asked to speak to young officers and NCOs, to share the lessons of his long career, and in every speech, he would tell them the story. He would stand before them, a living testament to the moral of his own tale, and he would describe in painstaking, humiliating detail his own colossal failure of judgment. "I was the best kind of fool," he would tell the rapt audience, "the kind who is absolutely certain of his own wisdom. I saw a woman, not a warrior. I saw a strange rifle, not a solution. I saw a breach of protocol, not a master of a new domain of warfare. My eyes were open, but I was blind. I let my assumptions build a wall between me and the truth. And that wall almost got us all killed." He would then pause, letting the weight of his confession settle over the room. "The single most important lesson you will ever learn," he would conclude, his voice low and steady, "is this: the most dangerous person on any battlefield is the one you underestimate. Look past the uniform. Look past the rank, the gender, the age. Look for competence. It is the only currency that truly matters. True strength doesn't need to shout. True authority doesn't need to posture. It is quiet. It is calm. It is present. Let your actions be your only argument. Be the quiet professional in the corner of the room. And for God's sake, when you find someone like that, don't try to confiscate their rifle. Just shut up, stand back, and get ready to learn."